Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast, courtesy of the Blood Red channel. I'm Josh Williams, and I'm joined by David Hughes. Dave, how was your week, mate?
Very good, thank you, mate. Yeah, as
You
always,
enjoying-
a good
you
week
enjoy-
every week.
Are you enjoying the transfer window?
It's heating up a little bit now, actually, isn't it? To be fair, it's been quiet so far, which has kind of been the case for January. Last few years, we know it's not the best market, especially with us being on a Liverpool podcast. We can, Liverpool don't tend to do that much business over the last year or two, but elsewhere it does seem to be getting a little bit tasty last day or so.
Yeah, well, Liverpool are without a game for about 3 weeks, I think it is. So we are reliant on transfers at the moment, and that is the theme of this podcast this week, as has been the case for the past few weeks, actually. But this week, we're going to touch on a few talking points and touch on the business of certain Premier League clubs, across the league, transfer business. But we're going to start with a player that Liverpool seem to be chasing. Seems to be quite a reliable link in Fabio Carvalho, youngster of Fulham. Any thoughts on him, Dave? You aware of him? You've seen him play and things like that, because he's obviously playing a state in the Championship at the moment.
Yeah, so I'd heard of him, but obviously only on the back of what's happened, last few months. People may remember I think he got some game time last season before Fulham went down. But this season has kind of been his breakout season, and yeah, look, I think any player who's still a teenager who's got some, I think he's got about 10 goal contributions now so far. I can't remember the split, but I know there's 10 goal contributions in there. He's still a teenager. You can be rest assured that that's a top talent who's got a very high ceiling. So I think from a Liverpool perspective, this is a really interesting one. And okay, his position is a little bit different, but we've talked a few times about like a Bellingham on here, and I think Bellingham's ceiling's higher. Obviously, Bellingham plays a little bit deeper on the pitch, where obviously he plays as like a number 10 in Fulham's system, but you can kind of see the appeal if Liverpool will eyeing him up a little bit and thinking, we could get this exciting young midfielder / attacker for basically nothing, because his contract's due to expire at the end of the summer, or you're weighing up paying 80-90 million for a player like Bellingham. So I just wonder whether that'll be in their thought process at all.
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard of the lad Carvalho, my first thought was just automatic. I didn't even go and check it, but my first thought was automatic that he is Portuguese, but he's not. He's actually a product of the of Fulham's academy by the looks of it. So despite his name, it looks like he is English / homegrown. I think there is a bit of Portuguese in there, according to transfermarket.co.uk. But I think he would qualify as an English homegrown player, which is obviously nice in the Brexit world. Obviously, it's going to impact the transfer market moving forward. Liverpool's English / homegrown players are getting on a little bit. If you think of Milner leaving at the end of the season, Jordan Henderson's obviously, he's going to spend another few years at the club, but I think he's now 30, 31. So I do think it makes sense to do this sort of thing. And if you look at what Carvalho is as a player, obviously he's only 19 years old, still a teenager, but I do think he's in that mould of a wide forward that Klopp has chased at Liverpool. Despite his age, this season he's scored 8 goals in the Championship, and last year as a 17-year-old in the Premier League 2, he scored 10 and assisted 5. So he seems to be that kind of pacey threat from out wide. Our producer there, Pat, has just put in Pat has replaced Guy for those who are interested. Pat's just put in he moved to England when he turned 11 years old. So yeah, interesting one.
That's not Pat, by the way. That's Carvalho who did that. Just to be clear.
Yeah.
It's interesting you said that, Josh, because obviously he's played predominantly like number 10 now, hasn't he? So are you saying that you think his profile is quite suited to be in this kind of more, if he was to come to Liverpool and be more of like a player who can drift out and be more of that wide attacker?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at what Liverpool have done since Klopp's arrived, and if you look at kind of how tactical trends seem to be going, I think strikers are a bit of a dying breed, personally, and I think number 10s, you could almost level as similar to number 10s, considering how few there is about, and Liverpool don't tend to use a number 10 since Klopp's arrived, at least in the 4-3-3. So I do think if he was to come into Liverpool's system, unless he was extremely good technically, I think he'd struggle to play as that number 9/number 10 Firmino role. So I would personally see him potentially out wide, but maybe I've got to look into him a bit more. Maybe I've got to watch a bit more of him.
Yeah, no, I think it is funny that obviously he's doing really well with them, but I see Marco Silva is still relentlessly sticking to that 4-2-3-1 that he played almost every week at Everton with, and he seems to be doing the same again. So, I mean, the reason I highlight that is obviously because that has that natural number 10 position in it, whereas, as you say, the 4-2-3-1 doesn't really have that. It'd have to be that kind of converted number 9 into a number 10. So that's why I wanted to highlight that. The point you were making, that Liverpool could be a little bit different. He could have a little bit more of a different role.
I actually forgot that Marco Silva was in charge. Actually, you know all about him, Dave.
Yeah,
was he good with the kids when he was at Everton?
I can't remember now. He left a couple of years ago, and in terms of the Everton managerial cycle, that's about 10 managers deep. So it's hard to remember who was doing what. But I did have a little bit of a soft spot for Silva because, around his kind of final months is when we were doing first 3 episodes of Analysing Everton, and we were kind of looking at Everton and saying, it looked like Silva's side weren't picking up many points, but they were actually a little bit unlucky. They were a lot of games in balance and just going against them a bit. Ended up obviously losing his job, but I think it's shown the job he's doing at Fulham that maybe there is a good manager in there, and give it 5 or 10 years, he may go on to be a top coach again at a top side. Because he's still young, isn't he? So he was quite young when he was at Everton. But it's interesting that he's gone to Fulham now. He's doing a really good job.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Fulham represents quite a proactive possession-based brand of football. They do try to dominate the game, similar to how Liverpool do in the Premier League. So I think he's playing a style of football that you could compare in similar ways to what Liverpool would do if he came to Anfield. And if you just look at his profile, he does seem to be a player who could be worth a fair bit further down the line. His contract he's out of contract this summer, so he could be attainable for a reduced price this month or for free in the summer with a tribunal fee maybe. But one thing I wanted to mention to you, Dave. Apologies if anyone can hear loads of noise, by the way, down my end, because again we're getting work done on the house. So
yeah,
I'm trying to talk over it. But how bad is it?
We can hear it, but I don't think it's impacting anything. I've had a few times. I'm glad we're not cutting it out. To be honest, just leave it.
It's probably impacting me more.
Yeah, honestly, the amount of times I've had it with, I hope he's not ever listening, but next door they're always doing work, and it does really throw you off. So this is an insight, by the way, to people who listen and watch how hard it can be. Not being in the studio these days and having to do it from home. It's a very DIY at times setup. But to answer your question, Josh, it's fine, mate. I think just crack on.
Yeah, well, one thing I wanted to mention in closing for Carvalho is I personally think Liverpool should do a bit more of this. I know it's difficult because players don't always come to the end of the contracts and stuff, but I think when it comes to poaching talents that, okay, they haven't been around very long, but there's quite clearly talent there from the lower leagues and stuff like that in particular. We spend what we earn type thing, and we try to get players before they've actually arrived at the peak and stuff. Liverpool don't tend to invest that much in players who are showcasing potential in the lower leagues and could go on to do big things. And this is an example, I suppose, of that. And I think we did it with Harvey Elliott as well. Funnily enough, also from Fulham. But I don't think Liverpool do it very often, and I think they could. I think they could really exploit the market there.
Yeah, I agree, but I think there's two drawbacks, isn't there? I think one issue is Liverpool are obviously like kind of at the very top of the pyramid, so they normally need players to come in and be able to compete at that level straight away, which you don't always get, do you, with younger talents? You know, they maybe need another year or two to develop, which is why. And we talked about this before, by the way, but which is why sometimes they're almost in a position where they could let a player like that go to another club, develop for 2 years, and then they handpick him when he's you know the full package, I guess. But I still think it's a valid point, and I thought that theory was a bit more relevant, say 2 or 3 years ago, where you needed these players to come in and have an immediate impact. But when you've got a really strong starting 11, 12, 13, 14 players that you can rely on at the moment, you can almost be that environment where these players can bed in without having to put too much pressure on them. And then they, you know, learn the trade, learn how the team play, and slowly kind of progress into being a more starting 11 player. So I think it's true. I think the other drawback is obviously it is quite rare, isn't it? Like to see players of that quality going for free. But I do think it's happening more than ever because of player power. You know, it's player power, agents, advising clients. You know, don't sign that contract, we'll get you the bigger move next year. And I think that's what's happened in this case. Actually, I think Fulham offered him a new deal in November, and he turned it down. Meaning, obviously, he's going to be able to go in the summer.
Yeah, I just think specifically, you know, back to certain players in the past, like, you know, Dele Alli, when Liverpool had the potential to get Dele Alli for about 5 million from MK Dons, and even a look at Leicester picking up players like James Justin, who's a decent fullback and play on both sides. Liverpool have needed depth of fullback for quite a while. I know we went and got Tsimikas, and we're okay and all that sort of stuff, but I just think sometimes there's a market for that. And, you know, even Bellingham, when Bellingham emerged at Birmingham City, Liverpool weren't even linked. You know, it was just Chelsea, I think, were linked, Dortmund and Manchester United. And I just think sometimes, I know Liverpool want some proper evidence behind the player before they invest in them, but I do think sometimes you can really benefit from moving early. You know, another example potentially, if you're looking abroad, is, I know it's a bit different because of his agent, but if you look at Haaland, for example, Liverpool went and bought Minamino from Red Bull Salzburg around the time that Haaland was emerging there. And I do think it's slightly bit different, but I do think sometimes Liverpool's reluctance to invest in a player who has just emerged sometimes can bite you a little bit. But I think of specific clubs, like I think Everton did it a while back with Calvert-Lewin. I think they got Calvert-Lewin from Sheffield United, was it?
Yeah.
For a really reduced price, and obviously now he's worth about 70 million or so.
Yeah, I think they had a good spell a few years ago when they weren't, you know, the circus they are now, and they kind of got Calvert-Lewin, John Stones as well. For, I can't remember, they got that as a reduced fee or a really good fee. And it was maybe someone like Mason Holgate, who, you know, hasn't developed into the player that you might have expected when he first come in, but he still had a, you know, steady career. I imagine if ever Everton were to sell him, you'd maybe get, you know, 10 million, so there'd be some good profit in there. So yeah, they're a couple of decent examples that they did fairly well in that sense.
Yeah, so away from Carvalho then, we're going to look at the business of just the Premier League as a whole. There hasn't actually been that much in bits of business, and there still is rumoured bits of business. Obviously, there's about 5 days left in the window as we record today. Some links as well. Some moves seem to be Liverpool linked as well, you know, in the past at least. But before we get onto those players, Dave, Julian Alvarez, mate. Already you have a green light there.
Yeah, you know, we've had a few tweets on him, haven't we? The only thing I would say, and I always like to think I'm fair with this, is that I do feel like when we last discussed him, there was already links with European clubs, but I think in this example, it was more maybe like a United, where City had been touted a little bit, but not really, kind of as solidified interest as it turned out to be. So it wasn't as if this was a complete bolt from the blue, excuse the pun, in terms of City signing him. But still, nonetheless, it's an interesting that we flag him, and then a few weeks later, one of Europe's biggest teams at the moment, City, go and secure a deal for them, which speaks volumes about how good the player is.
Yeah, I mean, I must be honest. When I saw the link, I was a bit worried. I was a bit concerned because I think City are obviously being very, very careful around who they invest money in terms of a striker. And obviously they've had Aguero, they've had Dzeko, they've had a number of top strikers really, but Aguero in particular was the top man. And I think Alvarez looks vaguely comparable. I think, and if you put almost any striker in a Pep Guardiola system, he ends up finding the net frequently, getting lots of shots off. Gabriel Jesus, when he arrived in England, was posting loads of shots, and I think a lot of that stemmed from the system. But yeah, I think he's getting signed. I think he's potentially going on loan for the rest of the season, and we'll see moving forward whether he hits the ground running or not. But again, it looks like a deal that very low risk for City. I think the fee I've saw quoted, I think like a release scores of about 17 million or something, which is absolute buttons.
Yeah,
it's buttons for City.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's well, you've just hit the nail on the head, haven't you? It's a low risk investment. I think that was a release clause. He'll go there. He's there till July, so there'll be some further developments, and then they can put everything in place to bring him in the summer, full pre-season, and go from there. And then it wouldn't surprise you if he kind of becomes straight into being an important player for them next year. Maybe that forward that they've kind of lacked at times this year, which seems ridiculous considering where they are on the table. But you've watched them a fair few times, Josh. I have, and despite how great they've been for large periods, they have looked a little bit like they may be missing that profile. So it could prove to be a good piece of business for them.
Yeah, it's looking interesting. But another player who's been linked with a move to Spurs, apologies for the noise, is
it's fine, mate, just leave it. If it gets bad, we'll let you know.
Yeah, okay. Luis Diaz, obviously linked with Liverpool very recently. I think we talked about him a few weeks ago, actually, in relation to a move to Liverpool. Moves were getting tipped for about 60 million, I think 70 million or so. And he seems, it's not confirmed, anything like that yet, but he seems to be of interest to Spurs. I was a bit surprised about that one. I don't know about you.
I was, because I just, of the names that he's being linked with, clubs wise, I don't remember Spurs being linked up until recently. He's probably not a kind of profile thought, that's definitely someone that Spurs should be going for. I'm not saying it's a bad move, obviously. I think he looks a top player, and we talked about him on here, but I just didn't see it coming. I guess the answer, that's my answer to it. I didn't see it coming. But it's understandable, at least looking at him as a player, why they'd be interested. We talk kind of fairly highly of him from a Liverpool's perspective. I can't remember if we concluded that maybe it'd be a deal that Liverpool would desperately need to do. But we still said, he looks to be a good player. In terms of his prospects of success, I don't know. Really tough, isn't it, coming from that division? Last time we talked about him, I'm right in saying we tried to think of some success stories direct from Portugal, and it was a bit hit and miss, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll have to see. What's your thoughts on that one?
I just think he's I think he's very much a left-sided forward who cuts in and does a bit of what Mane does type stuff. But I think they've already got Son, who is very, very two-footed, but I think prefers the left more than the right. And I think if you look at Diaz, I'm just not. I was just a bit surprised that he would be a Conte forward. Yeah, I think he seems to be leaning towards a 3-4-3 system. So you would have Diaz playing behind Kane and to the side of Son. But I don't know. I just didn't have him down as a Conte forward. I'm not really sure. I can't really explain too much why, but I think specifically having Son there and stuff, and I don't know. He doesn't seem to be particularly keen on Steven Bergwijn, for example, and I don't think they're that different in terms of profile, in terms of what they offer in a tactical sense and stuff. Obviously, they might be ability wise and things like that, but I was a little bit surprised by that, and I think considering the rumoured figures are a lot, I
What
would
is the
be.
figure, Josh?
Well, I think Porto are trying to get 60, 70. And I think Spurs, in typical Spurs fashion, are trying to pay a lot less. But I don't think he's worth more than 50 million personally.
No, and even that's top end, that isn't it? Not that I mean, look, I'm not saying that he can't be a fantastic player. I think we've already said the nice things. He's only 23 as well. Low to dribbling, goal threat, can create goals as well. But I just think it's dead hard those type of players. For me, when you talk about players coming over from Portugal, those type of players are the worst to try and predict how they're going to do, because I think, central defenders you can get a feel for, centre midfielders even, but these kind of like tricky, really skillful attackers, it's just so hard to see how that ability is going to translate into the Premier League. It's so hard to try and guess that. So that's a big gamble for me.
Yeah, another player who seems to be coming to England. This one seems a lot more along the line, as of this morning, actually, is Bruno Guimaraes of Lyon. Seems to be coming to Newcastle United, which is another relatively surprising one. I remember saying to you a few weeks ago when we were speaking about Phil Coutinho, that if you'd have said to me, where will Coutinho move to in the Premier League this month, I would have said Newcastle. He ended up at Villa. If you'd have said to me, where's Bruno Guimaraes going to move to in the Premier League this window, I would have probably said Arsenal or Man United. At a push, Chelsea, who seem to have 3 top quality options in central midfield, but not really 4. But he's ended up at St James's Park by the looks of it. So, again, thoughts on that one?
I think it's a really good buy for Newcastle. And I must be honest, I'm starting to fear for the little old Everton here. With you think Watford have brought in a new manager. Newcastle are significantly improving the starting 11. So a lot of the Reds listening, they might have a good summer based on what's happening here. But he's he's a fantastic player. I'm quite surprised Newcastle have got him, actually. I agree with you. I think he could have went to one of England's kind of Champions League sides, because he's got the whole package, hasn't he? He's really good in that kind of. I think they play double pivot there, don't they?
They do, yeah.
Yeah, he's in there. But then I'll probably leave the floor open for you on this part, based on your recent sweep. But I know he's just a really good passer of the ball. He can really penetrate from deep areas into the final third. Which kind of gives him that X factor over players in a similar position. So I'm not surprised that he's ended up in the Premier League. I just thought this would have been a little bit too soon for Newcastle to land this deal, but huge upgrade on the likes of who they've got in there now, which it was normally John Joe Shelby. Who I can't who else normally goes in there?
Isaac Hayden and Longstaff as well.
I wonder what his conversion rate is from distance on shots.
I think they've also got Joe Linton playing in there of late as well in midfield, because I think they was in the 3 recently.
He looked good though. I've actually seen Joe Linton in there a few times. He's done well. But huge upgrade. And as I said, I don't know if he'll be able to do his 1 goal and 48 shots from distance like Shelby, but he's still a really, really good buy.
Yeah, he looks really, really good, and I am similar to you in terms of being a bit surprised that Newcastle have been able to land him. But I did see a little note, Dave, that he's had his salary quadrupled, which is quite insane.
But when everyone was losing their mind, I was going to tweet, forget the fee that they're paying to sign him from the club. What was he getting in terms of his transfer fee? Because that's going to probably be the deciding factor, which is why Newcastle have been able to land him.
Yeah, but as you say, very good mover of the ball. But in addition to that, he looks like a keen defender of the ball as well. He ranked quite highly in League One for tackles, pressures. Also seems to dribble a bit more than the typical centre mid, because he's typically Brazilian in that way. And again, in terms of his attacking product, which is not that common for a centre midfielder, he also seems to create a fair bit. He ranks fairly highly in shot creating actions and expected assists and assists. So he looks like quite an all-rounder, I think. And Newcastle obviously need upgrades. I'm not sure he'll be enough to keep them up, but he does look very, very good.
Imagine there's a chance that he ends up in the Championship next year.
Well, that's what the surprising element about it, because that's absolutely a realistic possibility. And he only seems to have cost about 35 million, which again seems like really good business.
Yeah, I'd agree, mate. So yeah, I think they've done quite well, to be fair to them, and I'd be surprised if this one doesn't come off to be a good signing.
Just carrying on from what you've just mentioned there, just a little bit off track, typical fashion really for this podcast, but in terms of Everton, obviously they've let Lucas Dean go.
Yeah.
Benitez is gone. Michaelenko's come in. Nathan Patterson, I think it is, has come in. Am I missing anyone? That's it.
No, that's it. Yeah.
What's going on?
It's a circus, mate. It's yeah.
It is insane, isn't it?
Yeah, it's seriously a big problem. I think Everton are in massive trouble this year. I've already said on previous shows, on other shows, more Everton orientated, I've said that I think they could go within the next 3 years based on the structure in place, because you just can't keep outrunning this kind of poor structure and mistakes being repeated by the ownership. In terms of this season, I just think it'll be really tight. If the new manager comes in and has a bounce, I think you need 5 wins between now and the end of the campaign to stay up. And you think if a new manager comes in, as a bounce, you probably get 5 wins over the remaining games and be all right. But you touched on Lucas Dean there. Let's rewind to the end of last season. Everton's 3 most creative players: James Rodriguez, Lucas Dean, and Richarlison. You've basically got rid of both of them. 2 of those 3 are gone out the club. James Rodriguez gone, Lucas Dean gone. And what have you replaced them with? Townsend. Townsend, who was released by Crystal Palace. Damari Gray, who's done really well, to be fair, but that seems a little bit lucky, that one. Just what they've kind of picked a player out that's worked quite well. But I think they're in trouble, mate. What's your thoughts from the outside looking in?
I still would be really surprised if they go down or anything like that, because if you think about it, they couldn't possibly have been much worse, and even their worst still has them 4 points clear of the drop, with a game in hand on Newcastle, and notably better goal difference than Newcastle, better goal difference than Norwich by a large amount, like 3 times better goal difference than Norwich. About 6 goals better off than Watford. And you feel like that's despite Everton being at their absolute worst. So I feel like with Duncan coming in, I don't think it benefits him that his first game is against Stevie. I think Gerrard would know all about that, and he seemed to get really up for that, I thought. But I think against most other teams, Everton would have had the bounce enough to deliver a win there, maybe. But yeah, I think in that game it was a bit tricky. But just in general, about the way Everton are ran top to bottom, despite having an owner who's quite clearly willing to invest, which is an element that some people moan about with FSG. We don't spend enough or whatever. One of the main reasons I just find it really, really difficult to say a bad word about FSG in a sporting sense, when people bring up net spend and things like that, is because they are so clued up when it comes to running a sporting institution. And Mashiri, despite wanting to spend billions, quite clearly hasn't got a clue. and it's very easy to get an owner like that. And I do feel sorry for Everton fans.
Yeah, I can't gauge, why he's like that. And do you think it's an ego thing? Do you think there's just wanting to be the main man? Because
I,
you could easily pay, couldn't you, to have someone come in and be the football brains, put in an operation for probably a fraction of the cost and be successful.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. He seems to have, for me, far too much of a relationship with agents, and specifically, I think it's Kia, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's just not a good thing. And any club that's transfer orientated, specific with agents, doesn't tend to do that well outside of, like, for example, Wolves seem to do okay with George Mendes and getting Portuguese players in and stuff like that. But I can't think of many where when the recruitment of a club is so agent driven. I can't think of many examples where it's worked particularly well. And I don't know if it's an ego thing, but he just seems to be so incapable of looking in the mirror.
would
I
you
think
say, in your opinion, worst run club in the Premier League?
Oh yeah, comfortably, yeah.
Yeah,
I think, to be honest, actually, I mean, you're probably not going to want to wear this, mate, but I think I've thought to myself a few times, from a Liverpool perspective, it doesn't get much better than this, because right now, I think you've possibly got a toss up as two worst clubs run in the country at Everton and Man United, and arguably the best run in the country, arguably, is Liverpool. And Liverpool have got a coach that we all love and stuff like that. So in a way, these are kind of the glory days, but yeah, it is a bit miserable. Like, and I don't know what it's like, because Liverpool obviously had a period under Hicks and Gillette a while back, who would difference. I mean, Machiri seems to actually want to do well. He just seems to have no way of no knowledge of how to do it. Whereas Hicks and Gillette wanted to get paid, in my opinion.
Yeah. They just wanted the, as you said, they wanted the money out of it, didn't they? So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see who comes in. Don't even know who the manager is. And I think that the manager kind of mirrors the player recruitment as well. There's not really an ideology in place or a philosophy in mind. It's just, who should we go for? Lampard or Pereira and stuff. So, how do you think, before we move on, because I'm conscious that there could be Reds sitting here thinking I don't give a toss about Everton, like I want to talk about Liverpool, but how do you think Lampard would do? I think there's a loose Liverpool connection there. They were rivals at one stage when he was Chelsea manager.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I've found it very, very hard to analyse Lampard as a coach since he's kind of emerged. I remember doing a thread ages ago based on his time at Derby, and I know he reached the playoffs in his first season, but in terms of expected goals at the time, I remember it being a really weird season for them. Like, I think they scored something like 20 goals more than expected, and they conceded, though, 15 goals fewer than expected or something. And if in those coin flips you end up landing on the negative side a few times, very, very easily your results tail off and you end up mid-table or whatever. So at that time, I found it difficult to judge Lampard. And then he comes to Chelsea, and again, based on his time at Chelsea, I think he had generally the right idea. But I think I don't know. I think the way in which he executed his modern, proactive, aggressive style of play was just a tiny bit naive at times, and wasn't particularly, watertight, compared to like a Pep or a Tuchel or Klopp. I think Chelsea were easy to play through at times, and obviously when they got loads of players in as well, I think he struggled finding a solution with that. So I think he's had an alright managerial career so far, but I've got no idea how much of that is down to his actual ability as a coach.
Yeah, it's hard to see. You wouldn't be surprised if he went on to be quite a successful manager, but you also wouldn't be surprised to see him kind of not be, be a bit rubbish. So wait and see.
Yeah. So Adama Traore as well is another player who seems to be on the move, been linked with Liverpool relentlessly for years. I've generally split down the middle fan base, I think, with Liverpool sometimes. A lot of fans think he would be great. a lot of fans don't want to go anywhere near him. So he seems to be going to Spurs, and he seems to be going to Spurs to play as a wing back, which would be interesting. But have you got any thoughts on that one? Should Liverpool have been interested? Seems to be about a £20 million fee, which I suppose isn't that bad.
Well, seeing as you're always batting it over to me, I'll let you go first. As a Liverpool fan, how do you see that one? How do you see those links? Would you like to see Liverpool going for them?
No.
And that's the end of the show, guys. Catch you next week.
No, I've always been quite consistent with this. I've never particularly viewed him as much of a Liverpool player personally. Certainly not a Liverpool forward, at least. I don't think he has anywhere near enough end product to his game, and I think he's got obvious physical traits. I think he offers obvious tactical perks in terms of, his one-on-one ability, how he tends to almost attract opponents to him, which can generate space for others. He can get you up the pitch as a bit of an outlet. So I think he's a decent crosser of the ball as well. But I think he doesn't have that product that you need at Liverpool. And I think if he was to play for Liverpool, where most opponents sit 10 behind the ball at all times, and he doesn't have that space to drive into and stuff, and the crossing will be delivered more from the players behind him, such as Trent and Robertson and Henderson. I was never really sure how people envisaged that working at Liverpool, unless Liverpool was just revert back into purely being a counter-attacking team all the time. I think it would have been nice to have him in certain games, for example, when we faced Manchester City away or gained a lead against Manchester City or something like that. But I think more often than not, I'm not really sure how he'd add to Liverpool's game. So I wasn't personally that fussed that he seems to be going to Spurs. What about you?
Yeah, I agree with. I can't actually add that much really on what you've said from a Liverpool point of view. I agree with all that. I think if he is going to go somewhere and be more effective than it was always with a potential change in position, I think he's perfect for that. A kind of back three system that has heavy use of wing backs being more attack orientated, because if you think about it, there's a lot of you're keeping your width, you're driving up and down the flank, swinging balls into the box, and I think all that plays into his hands, plays into his strength. So, we have kind of said if he was to make a move to like a Liverpool in the past, it would have to be like wing back, and they haven't really got an opening for them. But if he was to make a move somewhere, he'd be better converted as a wing back, and the fact Tottenham are going to do that, you'd imagine. Means that to probably get the best version of him. So I can't see it. I think he just needs a consistency into his game. If he could somehow find that, playing it as like a wing back, then I think it's a good buy. But I don't know. What's the financials on it?
Well, I've seen. I think they initially bid 15 million, and the reason he got away with a 15 million pound bid, I suppose, is that he runs out of contract in 18 months. And that was the only reason I wasn't ruling him out of moving to Liverpool. It was because of his contract. If you can get him for a reduced price, I suppose you never know in a way. But I think he seems to be going for about 20 or a little tiny bit more. I don't actually think he'll do too bad for Conte. I think as a right wing back for Conte, where the expectation is to get up and down the line all day, I think he can do that. He's got the pace to do that. And I think Conte also likes his wing backs to basically get in the box and be an additional attacker at times. And I think Traore, can do that. Certainly a bit better than Emerson has so far for him. So I think it's one to watch. I think he'll do quite well. But I never really had much of an interest in bringing them to Liverpool.
Yeah, it's one of them, and I think some will be interested, but the majority won't be that bothered that he's going to Tottenham. Just quickly, actually, I'm just looking at the table a minute. Obviously, Spurs didn't have the greatest start, but so there's only 2 points between them and United, and they got 2 games in hand. Do you think Tottenham might sneak that top 4 with Conte this year and the buys they're making?
Yeah, I do actually. Underneath the surface, the numbers have actually improved under Conte. And I actually quite surprised recently that when he lost to Chelsea, that's his first defeat in the league since he took charge. So I don't think I've seen many coaches out there at all, to be honest, that are capable of delivering results so quickly when they take charge, like Antonio Conte can. I think he is a top coach, and it's going to be interesting to see how he develops the Spurs, because if he gets them anywhere near, competing for titles and stuff, I mean, that's a serious job. That I already think he's a world class elite coach. But if he gets anywhere near that, considering the squad overall that he's going to need and things, he's doing seriously well. And he seems to have identified Traore as his wing back.
Yeah. Well, I'm also tipping them, by the way, to break top 4.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Europe as a whole now, and just having a little gauge on transfers from across Europe. Obviously, Martial's gone to Sevilla on loan. City got around 50 million for Ferran Torres. So,
Yeah. It's not
I
bad for them.
actually remember us talking about him on the podcast when he first signed, and I remember us kind of suggesting that he's all right, but he won't be pulling up trees. And I think we've generally got that one a little bit right. I think, but another player as well who we've mentioned a lot on the podcast who doesn't seem to have hit heights that we kind of suggested is David Neres. We talked about him a fair bit a few years ago. I think we tipped him for a move a few times, and he recently moved to Shakhtar Donetsk for just under 11 million, apparently.
I hadn't even seen that.
Yeah, I was surprised myself. I spoke
Yeah.
to someone about it. It mustn't have been you.
It's normally the other way, isn't it? That kind of move, I mean.
Yeah, well,
next normally selling them.
yeah, well, obviously Shakhtar have a bit of a Brazilian contingent over there, and Neres is Brazilian, and he's still only 24, but he seems to have just. I don't think he's regressed or anything like that, but I don't think he's hit the heights that maybe he suggested a few years back. He was kind of like the Anthony of now, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But he's whatever. Something seems to have happened there, and he's moved to the Ukrainian top flight.
I'll be honest. I'm really surprised at that move. Yeah, I completely missed it. Didn't realise. But as I said, it's normally the other way. You don't normally see them, bringing players in. I'm surprised. Ready?
Yeah. I mean, there hasn't been too much other than that in the window. If you're just looking at it, Ainsley Maitland-Niles goes to Roma, which is a bit of a mad one. Ricardo Pepi comes over from the MLS, I think, to Augsburg. Bit of a strange one. He's tipped to be a top player, actually, a decent player. So we'll have to keep an eye on him, because I think he's only 18 actually. But yeah, unless you've got anything to add, mate, regarding transfer window stuff, we'll move on to a brief chat about the EFL Cup.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, and we can come back to transfers if we need to next week if anything interesting happens between now and deadline day.
Yeah, I mean, there's usually a reason why we don't speak about domestic cups on this podcast. It's because Liverpool never seem to be interested in them. And this season, while this podcast has been going on, Liverpool have actually reached the final, and we still haven't spoken about it. So this is the first time that we're going to actually speak about the EFL Cup in any way. But yeah, Liverpool seems to have reached the final, mate. So, I mean, are you surprised? Do you think that there's any reasons to why that's maybe happened this season? I certainly have thoughts on specifically Liverpool maybe now benefiting from depth more so than ever before under Klopp. Specifically at centre-back, I think that helps to be able to rotate your centre-halves and not have to bring in a lad who's 17, I think that's influenced it.
Yeah, I mean, my views are quite mirrored to yours, to be honest. I knew we'd briefly speak about this, so I had a quick look, and I used November as a kind of parameter, so to speak, just to get, because I feel like the League Cup's normally in its mid to latter stages then. So I'd look at Liverpool and November over the last few years, and I mean, literally, Liverpool have been the top 2 of the Premier League in each of the last 4 seasons at the end of November, going back to 2017. And then you usually had European football as well to be kind of balancing along with that. So as you said, I think it's just been difficult, hasn't it? You know, squad depth's been an issue. It's been tough to kind of find uh, players who could potentially feature in a League Cup game with the Premier League and Champions League also in the periphery. So it's just been hard, and that's why I think they've not really had success in terms of progressing to the latter stages and obviously reaching the final like they have this year. A little bit different, more options this year. And it's, I mean, we're talking about League Cup exclusively at the moment, but obviously Liverpool haven't, won the FA Cup after on the Klopp's tenure either. I can't remember if they've even been to the final. Can you remember if Liverpool been final FA Cup final on the Klopp?
We did reach a final in the first year on the Klopp, but I'm pretty sure that was the League Cup, yeah.
Yeah. So no FA Cup final, but I had a quick glance at that as well. And Liverpool just been a little bit unlucky with the draw. You know, got Manchester United away last year, always tough. I think there was Chelsea away year before that, and Wolves away the year before that, which again, you know, Wolves it isn't always an easy place to go. They're the 3 games that they went out on. So that's an explaining why the FA Cup hasn't really worked out. But yeah, in short, a few more options in the squad this year means that you have a good go at the League Cup, and I think it's a trophy that it's an interesting one, isn't it? The League Cup actually, because it's not one that will ruin your season if you lose it. You know, it doesn't have that same pressure of say if you were going into a Champions League final, but it's one that's kind of you'd like to win. So there's a little bit more enjoyment attached to it, I'd say.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting because we've never really seen Klopp even get into the latter stages, really, apart from his first year. But I've always thought that he will kind of play, a weaker side in the early rounds. And I don't think it's a case of he's wanted to go out, but I think it's been, if we go through, we go through. And then I think this is the first season where he's had that mentality, but we've actually got through. And then he's got far enough into the tournament where he's thought, it's actually worthwhile now me starting to field actual starters like Van Dijk played against Arsenal recently, Fabinho played and players like that. But I think in previous years, because there's such a focus on the Champions League and the Premier League, it's just been a case of play a weaker side in the League Cup. If they get through, great. If they don't, it's not gonna, we're not gonna suffer too much. And I think, as I said, we got through this season a few times. Obviously, we've got a slightly better depth than ever before, in my opinion. And he reached the stage around, the quarters. I went to the quarters game. I think that was against Leicester. And he seemed to, specifically at half time, he seemed to actually want to win the game. He brought on a few regular starters, took off a few of the kids, and the change worked. And he's went for it since, by the looks of it. But I do think generally over the years, the EFL Cup hasn't particularly made that much sense for Liverpool, considering what Liverpool have wanted to be. When Klopp first came in, Liverpool were about the 5th, 6th best team in the country. And in order to climb and be better, winning the EFL Cup wasn't going to do it. Because I think if you win the EFL Cup, you get paid about what most salary is once a week. You get virtually nothing for it.
And how much is that, Josh? And should it be more?
let's not go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, it's I mean, I don't know why Salah came to mind. I'll probably get grief for that one. You get paid whatever Virgil van Dijk earns in 1 week or Jordan Henderson earns in 1 week. Take it whatever you want. But yeah, I think so. I think from an economic perspective, winning those domestic cups doesn't really do anything for your status as a club. Whereas finishing in the top 4 in the Premier League gets you a lot of money. It gets you Champions League status to get better players in. Winning the Champions League and getting into the latter stage of the Champions League does the same thing. So I think for Liverpool perspective, wanting to grow as a club and reach the pinnacle again, I don't think it made that much sense to go for the domestic cups. Whereas now that you've kind of, I suppose, achieved the status that you've been chasing for a few years, now maybe you can dedicate a few more resources to the domestic cups, because now you have those resources to dedicate to the domestic cups, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, it was never going to be kind of a transformational trophy win like, a Champions League or Premier League is. But to just add to your points, Liverpool probably at a position now where we know all the best players are in the peak years, and I think it's time to now start collecting trophies, as many as possible before this group obviously disband and depart, which is going to probably happen in the next few years. So any trophy will do.
Yeah, it's one to watch anyway. And closer to the game, we will obviously, with it being a final, we'll dedicate an actual preview to the Chelsea game. Look at all the aspects around it, where the game can be won and lost and things like that. So, yeah, that's one to look forward to. But I think we'll round up there, mate. So, yeah, a bit of a scattergun transfer episode, that one, I think. But thanks for joining us, mate.
Thank you, mate. Cheers.
Yeah, we'll be back next week to potentially look at scouting picks again, potentially do a Q&A. We'll see where we go with that one. But do tune in. Thanks for tuning in this week, and we'll see you then.